Hello and good afternoon. You're very welcome along to You and Your Business with me, Don Harris. Each week on the programme we talk to people in business about how they get started and what they're doing now. We may have a chat about a book that they like or a website that they use, and ones that could be useful if you're looking to have a good read or pick up some advice online. The email address for the show is yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie. If you'd like to get in touch or maybe talk about what you do for a living on a future show, drop us a line. This week I'm delighted to be joined by David Quinn of Investwise.ie. David, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me on, Don.
Nice to have you here. Now, if you recognise that name, it's because David sailed for Ireland and certainly was for many years the voice of authority, I suppose you might say, talking about sailing. But he's not doing that so much now. He's gone to the golfing pastures, so he doesn't have time for everything. But he is very much in the business of financial advice from very much an independent perspective. And David runs a company called Investwise.ie with a few other people. And the interesting thing about this, David, we'll go back to how you got into this whole business, because you've always had a kind of a business streak in you. But the difference about Investwise is that it's independent fee-based advice and not commission-based, so that you can genuinely give investment advice or other advice to people looking for financial information without any allegiance to anybody. And that's quite important in this, isn't it?
That's what I see as being critical, Don, to getting good financial advice. You need to know that the guy who's giving you the advice is sitting on your side of the table.
Yeah.
He's not sitting on the product provider side of the table trying to sell you a product. And, you know, he may have your best intentions at heart, but he has to sell you something to get paid.
Yeah.
People need to get paid for their time.
Yes.
And
that has been the history of financial advice in Ireland, really. That's just the way it is. Is that the way the business has always been, you know, across the whole industry here in the UK and other places?
That's the way it's been all over the world.
Right.
And I've been to international conferences, particularly when I set up the business first, just to try and see how is it done elsewhere. What are the kind of typical problems people encounter? Are the advice issues around the world all the same? And they do tend to be exactly the same. And you talk to advisors in Australia or advisors in the States, and their clients are asking them exactly the same questions as they're asking here.
And probably many of the same companies are in those other countries.
Certainly within
Europe.
Europe.
Under different names, potentially.
Yeah, within Europe they are anyway. The US companies would be the big Merrill Lynch's and Goldman Sachs that don't tend to operate actively here because we're such a small country. But I guess the difference between the UK, Australia and Holland recently and here is that they've banned commissions.
Really?
So the UK banned commissions from the 1st of January. Australia...
Of this year?
Yeah, and Australia did it a couple of years ago. And the Dutch did it this year with very little notice for their advisors. So
now,
that's a trend.
We probably ought to explain why this is so important so people understand, in case somebody mightn't be aware. Generally, up till recently maybe then, if you were getting financial advice from a broker, he or she might advise you across a range of 10 or 15 products or companies certainly, but each of those will pay a commission to the broker. So if you sign up for something and the broker says to you, well look, it's just going to be €38 a month, and you pay that, and particularly life insurance or something like that, and when it comes to paying out on the policy, the value of the policy will be 150,000.
Yeah.
So you say, oh, that doesn't sound, I could manage that.
Yeah.
And then they don't say anything about, and by the way, for the pleasure of doing business with me, and thank you very much, I pocket 35,000 or something like that.
Yeah, well, that'd be a nice chunk of change to take on that one. But yeah, whether you're starting up a pension AVC or you're taking out life insurance or an investment bond or whatever it is, there's always some form of commission around that. And that's the incentive for the product provider towards the broker. And that's how the broker gets paid. And that has always been the way it's been.
Yeah, and to a certain extent we've never worried about it, because the way you look at it, say, well, that's great. It's not costing me to talk to you then. You're getting paid by the company. But of course the other way of looking at that is, yeah, but then you have an allegiance to those companies. So you're always going to go back to the companies that pay you the most commission.
Well, yeah, you could say that. Even though you're independent, you might have a loyalty. You might not always place business with the big commission payer, but you'd certainly be thinking about them. But more importantly, people do think they're not paying for it because, well, the life company has paid my advisor his commission, so I'm not paying him, so that's great. I've gotten free advice. But if you strip out the commission out of the products, they're much, much cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened in the UK now. You can see that with investments and pensions where they're not paying commissions anymore. They're not allowed to.
Yeah.
The costs are half what they are in Ireland, and it's starting to happen here. Some kind of forward-thinking life insurance companies and investment managers are seeing that this is the way it's going to go, and are reducing their fees.
Now, is this in any way linked back to the financial regulator? I mean, we always thought, you hear so much about the financial regulator, but in all honesty, it turned out that the financial regulator, when the crash came, was, to coin a phrase, sitting on his hands, really. So does the financial regulator now look actively at all the products and all the companies that are involved in the Irish market? I mean, are they much more stringently regulated?
And your independent financial advisor or broker or whatever you want to call them, they're very, very heavily regulated now. They have to do reports to the central bank on a regular basis. They have to make sure that their, indemnity insurance is up to date, and they have to make sure that in their dealings with their clients that they're upfront, transparent, and give the client all the information they need to make an informed decision. But even with all that, it's still very, very, like, when I see the documents coming in for a new life insurance policy or a pension, there's 20 pages of paperwork in there. It's very hard for an uninformed individual to delve through that paperwork and see, what exactly am I paying here? What have I got?
Yes. It's
just a very complicated structure, and they don't like to make these things easy, but partly because the central bank has such stringent regulations. All those boxes have to be ticked anyway. But at the end of the day, it's a very simple decision made very complicated by all this compliance.
Yes.
And that's what we try and do, is simplify it by stripping out the commission, and the client pays us directly.
Well, I was going to say that's what you do very well, because you give them basically reassurance that what they're considering is a good product. It's a good thing for them to do. Whereas it's just a possibility, and we've all heard stories of the salesman who's come along and the banks in the past, we've now discovered, who've been really selling products that they shouldn't have been selling to the person. So you're now in a happy position, as you rightly say, of being on the side of the buyer, which isn't always, or hasn't always been the case. So this way you can see, and from what you told me earlier, you take everything that they have. It might be a family, it might be a business partner, it might be a small business, it might be an individual. You take look at their whole situation. I think you called it lifestyle financial planning.
Yeah.
Very good phrase.
Yeah. So sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing. And what we do is we sit down with our clients over an hour and a half, and we talk about what do they want out of life, what do they want for their children's education, when do they want to retire, what do they want to do in retirement, do they want to save up for some big purchase like a second home, in a holiday home, or do they want to buy a new car, or whatever. All those lifestyle financial decisions, that's what we're worried about. We're not worried about the transactions and the products and pensions, really. What we're interested in is, what do people want out of life?
Yeah.
And can they get their finances into a position where they're going to be able to achieve those objectives?
And you must then occasionally have to be a bit dogmatic with somebody and say, well, look, if that's what you want, you better stop doing that then, because that's getting you nowhere.
Yeah. That's where our real value comes in. Particularly when I sit down so regularly in front of couples and obviously, married couples sometimes tend to balance each other out, with the husband being very entrepreneurial and risk-taking, and the wife being cautious, and they work very well together as a team. But when you sit them together and say, what are your objectives, guys? What do you want to do? What do you want from life? Suddenly they might have different ideas about how they want to get where they're going to be.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a discussion about, you're really not going to be able to buy that holiday home in the south of France with your current lifestyle. So you need to save a bit more now, or you're in great shape, guys. Keep going at what you're doing.
And there may even be a case there where you're the first person to actually conduct a conversation between a couple or a business partnership potentially about these issues, because they've been carefully avoiding the conversation because it's not nice.
And the business partnerships are even worse than the married couples, because they don't have to go home together. So they can harbour a lot of issues behind the scenes, and sitting down with company directors and working through their business plans as well as their own personal plans, one director might want to retire at 60, the other might want to retire at 75 or whatever.
And do
there
you
can
ever
be
have
big
that
gaps.
green light moment when you're having a conversation with a business partnership and you say something, you point something out, and one of them says something, and the other one, there's a bit of a silence, and then says, "You never said that before."
Yeah,
or words
all
to
the
that
time.
effect.
All the time. Particularly if a guy suddenly drops the bombshell that he wants to get out of the business in 5 years' time.
What?
Suddenly, what do you mean 5 years? You know, I was
Yeah.
thinking 15. Yeah, but it's a great conversation for guys to have. And it's
Definitely,
very
yeah.
valuable.
Very important.
And it's about putting a plan in place then. And suddenly they realise, well, we actually don't have a plan. We have great plans for growing the business and getting new clients in or creating a new product, but they don't have any plans for themselves. How are they going to exit the business? What happens if something happens to either of them before
That's a
then?
really important point, because people running a business are so involved with running the business. I mean, you're firefighting, you're looking for new business, and then when you have the business, you can't go and look for more business because you haven't got time handling the business that you have got. It's a real spiral.
It is.
So somebody coming like you're like the cavalry coming over the hill, you know, with a solution suddenly. Look, just do this and follow my plan. You know, a leader of men. You can kind of say, if you do all these things, this will happen. But you can do it justifiably with an independent hat because you're not tied in to any organisation. So you're not tied into a bank or... I mean, all these little restrictions we hear on advertisements on radio, particularly. You can have a 20-second advertisement with a 40-second long qualifier at the end, which goes at about 90 miles an hour. You can't really hear it, but you know it's all about the financial regulator.
And you don't know what it means.
No.
Like most of the time when I sit with couples, they thank me because they took out their mortgage protection when they took their mortgage out. They took their pension out with their company. They inherited 50,000 from Auntie Jane, and it's all with different people, and it's all in a filing cabinet under the stairs, and they can't pull it all together, and they don't have the time with kids and with work and with whatever. They're never going to sit down for an hour and a half at the kitchen table with the kids gone to bed and think about it all and say, is it all working for us? So that's when I come in.
That's the worst time to do it.
They
dedicate you never
time.
sleep that night anyway. You have nightmares. It's the worst time to do it.
That's true.
You know, that is exactly
I call that
the problem.
kitchen table review. But
it's just not an hour's time that you want to put into that type of conversation. You want to talk about something else.
Absolutely.
You're on holidays. It's the ideal time. You're not going to talk about on holidays
No
anyway
way.
because you're trying to have a holiday.
So they
it's a
dedicate some
spiral.
time. When I'm there, that's what they do. They sit down and we talk about it.
Yes.
And they start to think about, wow, do we need it all? Is it going to get us where we want to be?
Yeah, it's a classic disconnect going on. And I'm quite interested in all that area. Now, we're going to go whizzing back to when you started out in the whole business, because what you've managed to do is, to a certain extent, poacher turned gamekeeper, in that you were involved with the whole big world of finance and investments and shifting millions around the place for a large corporation. And you did that for, I think, 10 years.
Yeah, give or take.
Give or take. And eventually you just came to the point of saying, do you know what, this is a bit soul-destroying. I'm getting a good living and the company's doing very well. There's not a lot of job satisfaction. Is that right?
That's exactly
the way
it.
it was?
Working in the IFSC, it was great fun, you know, as the IFSC was growing and those big banks were growing, and I learnt a lot. But at the end of the day, you came home after working long hours every week, and you look back, what did I actually achieve that week? And it was the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah.
Working for big multinationals and billionaires and just moving money around. It wasn't very satisfying work. And it was in kind of 2003, 2004 that I realised that I wasn't waking up on a Monday morning looking forward to heading into work. And
that's key, isn't it?
I wasn't getting satisfaction out of achieving something.
Yes.
I think everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people would like to feel that they are creating something or achieving something or helping people or whatever it is, something satisfying.
You've got to have that, because
it's very
otherwise
important.
it's a bit shallow.
Yeah. So it was tough,
and you made a very interesting point to me earlier when we were chatting, and I made the comparison to what happened with Nick Leeson and Barrel Bank. I mean, you were shifting around loads of money, looking at loads of figure on a screen, and maybe 3 screens at once.
Yeah.
But it wasn't real money. It was money, but it wasn't real money,
No.
because you become so detached from those large figures.
I feel much more nervous now about moving 5,000 euros of my client's money around or making a recommendation than I did about a 5 million euro transaction back then, which was just a number. No one really, it wasn't really at risk, and it wasn't anybody's money in a way. It was probably big pension fund money, but working with directly with people, sitting eyeball to eyeball with a client, saying this is what we're going to do with your €5,000. It's much more
satisfying.
Much more satisfying. And
now I'm going to hold you there because we want to talk about a book, because you have a book that fits into this category very well about just what we're talking about. So for a moment we leave it there. We're talking to David Quinn of Investwise.ie, and we're still going to be talking to him, but we're going to talk to him about a book. So, David, you've brought in The Behaviour Gap by Carl Richards. It's an unusual book. Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard about it before. Tell me a little bit about it.
Carl Richards was a financial planner in the States. He still is, actually. He still has plenty of clients. And he wrote this book as a result of blogging on the New York Times. And the blogs that he started to do were very, very simple financial messages. But they became so popular, he wrote the book at the end. And he tours around the world now talking about the behaviour gap and this theory that he has. And I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of weeks ago. We had him over in Dublin as part of an organisation I'm with. And after talking to him and hearing him present and reading the book, I just thought it was such a brilliant, simple, easy to understand message, and breaks down all of the complicated theories behind investments into some very simple ideas that, if followed, will almost guarantee financial success. They're not. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's very much about slow and steady, and keeping things very simple and keeping your costs down.
Do you think we should give him Enda's number, just in case?
I think it wouldn't be any harm, because he's a great guy, and it's I don't know where you'd actually buy the book. It's probably available on Amazon. But
so you can order it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, as we always say, if you try through the bookshops, Eason's or Chapters, or any of the independent bookshops in town, have a look and investigate it, because it does sound like it's well worth having. So Carl Richards came over and he was talking. I imagine it was to the Society of Financial Planners. Was
exactly.
It? Yeah.
There's a few like-minded financial advisors like me who are fee-based rather than commission-based, and we set up this Society of Financial Planners at the start of the year, and this was one of our first events, and we had about 120 advisors.
So what did Carl have to say?
Well, basically what he says is that in simple terms, the one big kind of slide that he uses, which hammered the idea home to me, was if you look at the long-term returns on equity markets in the US, nice and easy to understand. They have a long history, and over 20-30 year period, equities will return about 8% a year. If you invested in the S&P 500, on average you get about 8% a year over the long term if you reinvest a dividend. The long-term average return for your investment manager investing in US equities is about 7%. So it's at 1% less than the market. And that's because they have to get their fees.
Right.
So on average, they get the market return less their fees. Most people expect their investment manager to beat the market, and the odd one will beat the market every so often, but over the long term, none of them do. So you're giving up 1% for an investment manager trying to invest your money for you. So you don't need that. But if you look at the long-term returns of investors, you, me, Joe, blogs, it's about 5%. And that's what Carl calls the behaviour gap, and that's what the book is all about. That difference between the market return and what people actually really get. And the reason for that difference is because people tend to buy high and sell low. They tend to buy into the markets in 2000, or when the dot-com bubble was happening, and in 2007, and then they tend to sell at the bottom.
And that's a kind of a cycle, because everybody gets drawn into that because they think things are, better buy now because these things are going through the roof, and they buy.
Yeah.
And then... we all know what's happened with the crash in the last 5-6 years, and people so much got caught. Phrases like being greedy were around, but it wasn't so much that. That was the advice they were getting, and people said, do this and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And one day they did think they'd sell them, but what happened was that the selling bit, as I understand it, the cycle that said sell, happened so quickly.
Yeah.
Nobody reacted fast enough. So is that part of what Carl is saying?
That's exactly it. And if you look at one of the really interesting stats he has, was he looks at the inflows into equity funds. So when you open your pension, you have an equity fund or you have a bond fund. The 1 month record inflows into equity funds in the States was in March 2000. Just at the month that the dot-com bubble burst.
Yes.
And the record outflows was in or around the summer of 2002, just at the bottom of that cycle. And if you look at how much money is on deposit in Ireland at the moment, you'd say we're at kind of something similar is happening in Ireland again, that we were all going crazy for property and equities in 2007, And now we're all sitting in bank deposits and worried about which bank is safest, when we've had a few years of a brilliant equity market recovery.
Yeah.
So it's those cycles and trying to take the greed and the fear.
Very interesting.
The fear is just as damaging.
Look, we better get back to talking about your own business, Investwise, and everything you can do, because that's fascinating stuff, and it's all encapsulated in The Behaviour Gap by Carl Richards. You'll have to go and look for it. You won't find it. You might find it in a second-hand bookshop, I suppose. How long is it out, that book, would you think?
I'm not sure. A few years anyway, but you'll definitely find it online if you Google it.
Can you see what the publisher's name is on the back there?
No, I can't, Don.
I see a little side on the sign. It might be Penguin. I see a little...
Penguin, yeah.
See the emerald on the side. So there we are. So The Behaviour Gap. Go and look for that. Ask in your local bookshop or order it online. Well worth a read. We're talking here to David Quinn from Investwise.ie. And what we've discovered is that having an independent broker who is fee-based is not a bad idea, because the range of products is limitless for a start. And the advice that you get is very much based on what's good for you, not what's good for the broker. Yeah. Now, I know for years we would always say the brokers, on our side, but it just mightn't have been that way. And another telling point is that it would appear that brokers are always keen to get you to change horses when it comes to renewal. And look at this product, look at that product. And that's, I presume some of the commission is what I would call front-ended. They get a bigger fee by doing the change and then less later, or how does that work?
It's interesting you should say that, because the central bank are doing themed audits of brokers at the moment, because there's not really a huge amount of new business happening. There's not lots of new monies going into pensions at the moment, so there's a lot of advisors switching from one pension provider to another, or one life company to another, because that pays out up to 5% commission, which is €5,000 on a €100,000 pension. It's a big check.
Yeah.
So the central bank are auditing that now to say, was that a justified switch? Did you save the client money? Did the client need to switch?
Really
why did you do it?
Yeah.
Because there's so much of it going on. There's a real swings and roundabouts between all the life companies at the moment. Money, and it's purely, I wouldn't say it's purely switching to make the commission, but there's certainly some of that going on, and the central bank are aware of that, and they're checking. Was that switch justified?
Yeah. Now, we need to be a bit careful here, because we don't want the impression that the financial advice everybody's had in the past from some of their trusted advisors has been wrong. That's not necessarily the case. Could absolutely be the case that the products that were sold by an independent broker to a couple, a business, an individual, were right for that individual at the time.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But circumstances can change. And all we're saying is that by having independent advice, you are definitely getting real independent advice. There's some very high profile cases where things went a bit wrong, and it seemed like the people were very upstanding and had great credibility, but things can go wrong. This relationship of trust between you and your clients is massively important, because with your knowledge and all the background you have, you can bring that experience, but you also have to be trusted by the people you're dealing with. And to a certain extent, you have to trust them that they're telling you everything. Otherwise, the whole relationship breaks down. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and actually, it's funny, when I set up relationships with people, they give me a little bit of information at the start. But when you build that trust, suddenly you realise, oh, I didn't tell you about that other thing I have, Dave, because I wasn't sure whether I was going to be dealing with you. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
And just to comment on what you said, I fully agree with you that most advice given by brokers is good advice. But I think it's very nice for clients to know exactly what they're paying for and how much they're paying.
Yeah.
And that's the key. It's not always bad advice, but it's transparency is so important.
Tell me, I have to ask you this, because we just touched on it there. Did you ever have the situation where you've just had a meeting with a couple and they're married quite a while and you've done all that, and then the day after you get a phone call from either of them saying, Dave, that conversation with me, that was all grand, but look, I couldn't tell you in front of my other half. I have this thing over here.
Oh, yeah.
And she or he doesn't know about it.
Yeah, I have the Paddy Power account, by the way, that I haven't told her about.
How do you handle that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, it does happen. Yeah, and it's all part of what I call the discovery meeting. Sometimes it's discovery between the husband and wife, not just between them and me.
I'd say it's some discovery, all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's always fun.
Later on. Yeah. So you become a little facilitator there of new beginnings, we call it.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Now, any unusual cases that you just touched on a case there for earlier on. where somebody made a swap. It was a solicitor in this particular case, and he was dealing with something. But the solicitor never informed the client that if the client went this particular route, he or she, the solicitor, would end up with a massive commission.
Yeah, that can happen. It's the commissions are buried so deep in the paperwork. It can happen that clients don't realise how much the guy is getting, and that's very common.
Well, the reason I'm raising it, sorry to cut across. The reason I'm raising it is the business of, I would call it, dealing direct with the companies, which is what you're doing, takes out the commission, which means the prices are less.
Yes,
isn't that the way it is?
Yeah, significantly less.
So over the period of 20 or 25 or 30 or 40 years, or however long this particular policy is going to run, there's huge monies involved.
Tens of thousands of euros. Yeah.
So it's well worth pushing that button and inquiring about that with your financial advisor, or with your accountant, or anybody who is advising you. How does this operate? Does the company pay out a commission, and does that mean if we were dealing with a company that didn't pay a commission, it would be cheaper for me to buy?
A very simple test is to ask your advisor to show you, when they have to show you quotes and projections. So ask them, can I also see a nil commission quote?
Okay.
So you can see the difference. Then you can make an informed decision. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. I'm happy with you getting that.
Yeah.
Or you negotiate a deal. You'd negotiate a deal with a guy buying a telly. So, why not negotiate?
It's all about transparency. I think we've all been hit a little bit with a little bit of uncertainty, let's say, and nervousness that really what we're being told wasn't the case. So I think it'd be fair to say if things are transparent and upfront there, providing you can read it. You gave the example there of 20 pages. Who's going to be able to read all that? You lose, the will to live after about 3. But you do at the same time need to know that what you're signing up to is okay and is going to stand up, even though it's got all this 20 pages after it. We can understand it. We can live with that. Look, we're going to have to stop there because we are once again running out of time. We've been talking to David Quinn of Investwise.ie. You can get David at dave@investwise.ie, and you'll pick up some good information. Have a look at their website. There's a few people involved. There's a lot of experience. David, thanks a million for coming in.
Thanks,
really
Don.
Been very
Enjoyed
interesting. It. Could talk for ages and ages. You can contact the programme by emailing your business at dublincityfm.ie, and maybe we'll hear from you. Could be talking about the programme. On the programme about your business at a different time. The podcast of today's show will be available on talkback.ie from tomorrow. Thanks to Mark Baker for looking after us today. I think Yvonne's coming up with the news next. For now, thank you for your company. I'm Don Harris, and I hope you'll join me again next week at the same time for more about you and your business.